Welcome, everybody. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to learn a little bit more about SmartDeploy and our take on managing and maintaining Windows 10 here this afternoon. A couple of quick kind of housekeeping agenda items. We want to talk obviously about Windows 7 end of life and migrating to Windows 10 predominantly here, and also maintaining it. We'll touch on some licensing and reimaging rights, since that's a pretty common thing that comes up as people start over with a new operating system on how to stay compliant with reimaging rights and volume licensing. We'll talk a little bit more about SmartDeploy as well. I'll take you on a quick tour of the product here at the end, and do Q&A. We'd love for the session to be as interactive as we can make it, so please feel free to chime in on the team chat, and we'll address those questions as they trickle in and make this session as helpful to you as we can. I want to cover up just a little bit about SmartDeploy for those of you that don't know a bunch about us. First off, anybody that's attending this session is going to has the ability to receive 15 free licenses. We'll talk more about that later. So, great free offer is over $600 value. So instead of handing you swag and stuffed animals and everything like that at a real trade show, we'll just give you our actual software that's free to use for forever, at least on those 15 machines. So a little bit of background about us. Our CEO and founder, Aaron Suzuki, started this business about 14 years ago. We started initially as an independent consulting firm, and we still do a lot of that work on our consulting side of our business for large technology organizations doing technical marketing and sales and engineering. We invested pretty early and often in the virtualization space. That was really kind of one of the things that we grabbed onto. We thought virtualization was really cool technology. It was fun, and it solved a lot of complex challenges. We did a lot of redistribution and packaging and optimization of virtual machines and helping distribute those to partners worldwide. And then what we started to see is that the thing that was cool about a VM, it was a portable way to run a live system, and we use those a lot of times for demos and setting up complex environments and being able to share systems in that way. We started to realize that was really cool, and this kind of hardware independent thing was great. And we thought, well, what if we could do that with physical devices? And so that's what we did. We've been shipping SmartDeploy since 2009. And SmartDeploy is a hardware-independent imaging solution that works great on all your desktops, laptops, servers, and tablets. So we'll talk more about that later. But we basically started the company because we knew there had to be a better way. There was a lot of sector-based imaging tools that were problematic, and again, we liked that virtualization stuff. So we continued in on that and built out this business. We have over 2,500 customers worldwide. Most are in North America, predominantly U.S., but we maintain our privately owned, self-funded, independent voice in the community, and we're focused on our customers. Eric and Alan and I, we listen to what our customers are asking for, we listen to the features they're looking for, and we discreetly tie those into the product and do releases frequently to be able to get what customers are looking for turned around in a pretty quick way. So we maintain, focused on you as our customers, and listen to what you're looking for, build those features into the product, and we'll talk more about that as we continue here. So I assume most of our customers, data-wise, we see are already doing Windows 10 deployments, but we deal with a lot of enterprises as well that needed to stay on Windows 7. A lot of customers skipped Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 and stayed on 7. There's pros and cons to that. For some of those of you that did make a migration to 8 and maybe 8.1, those were good learning steps, and it teaches you along the way and sort of progresses you along the way. And making the jump from 7 to 10, there's some gaps there that not everybody is aware of. But Windows 10 is growing like crazy. It's becoming a forcing function as Windows 7 is coming into life, and people want support, obviously. And there are some benefits. There are some drawbacks too, just like everything. But obviously, there's over 700 million devices running Windows 10 already, and that's up from 200 million from last year. So people are either testing or doing a few different departments maybe have it. And Microsoft really, learned a lot from this kind of tick-tock major minor release cycle, and things are really changed with Windows 10. So there's a lot of performance and security improvements that we'll talk about with Windows 10, and we've got a plan for migrating and getting there. So for the bulk of today's session, we really want to focus on two things. We want to focus on migrating to Windows 10, tips and tricks, best practices, what that really means for you. Well, that'll be kind of the first half of the session. The back half will be more about managing Windows 10 and how Windows 10 updates factor into your environment, because it's pretty different. It's pretty different than how 7 was, and it's not abundantly clear on what's happening under the hood. So Alan and Eric are going to give you the nitty-gritty behind the scenes of what's actually happening, because it's not in glossy print all over the place by design, right? Microsoft wants to handle things differently for you, and that means different things for IT pros that are used to being in total control, and some of that's evolving and changing. So we'll cover out on migrating to Windows 10, and then later on we'll talk more about managing. So one of the biggest topics here around Windows 10 is security. And so I'll turn the time over to Eric, again, our Director of Engineering, to talk more about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Spencer. Yeah, security. So I guess kind of before we get into the topic, it's, we're talking about some reasons why you might want to be moving from Windows 7 to Windows 10. We all loved Windows 7 here as well, and actually had to force some of our engineers off of it into Windows 10, and there's some good reasons to move. One that I think is top of mind for all IT professionals is security. It's not top of mind, it's at least top of press, and you see it everywhere. So, vulnerabilities every day, and the bad thing that can happen if you don't keep your environment secure. So there's some really neat new features in Windows 10 that help you keep your environment more secure. Most of those features are actually built on top of virtualization-based security. And this is a component of the operating system that essentially isolates privileged memory and runs at a higher privilege than the kernel. So even if an attacker gets onto a user's device, they can't necessarily steal additional credentials and authenticate against the domain and eventually get their way up to a domain admin account. They're kind of stuck in that user context and are unable to get a higher privilege based on the administrative rights on a specific PC. So virtualization-based security also uses, or AppGuard, DeviceGuard, and CredentialGuard use virtualization-based security. So AppGuard launches websites that have been defined or flagged as malicious in an isolated environment. So when you use IE or Edge, you can actually hit a malware-infected website and have that containerized so that it doesn't affect the operating system. CredentialGuard, like I said, so it protects the actual credentials of the user and anyone else on the device from an admin hack that could, pull the hash from an additional user and pass that across the domain. And then DeviceGuard can be used by IT to define policies on what can and cannot run on machines. And using Secure Boot, you also get another level of security where you can stop physical attacks. So if somebody actually gets the machine, you can block them from booting it or getting access from another operating system. In addition to that, it also enables some new driver signing requirements, and this is stuff that we ran into as well when we first started working with Windows 10. Kernel mode drivers now have to go through a different process than they did in the past to make it harder for somebody to create a malicious driver and sign it and have it run on your environment. Essentially, you have to now go through and get an extended validation certificate. And that requires a little bit more vetting from the vendor that's selling it to you. Once you get that EV certificate, you can sign your driver, but that's not even necessarily enough to get it to run. You have to run it through a test suite designed by Microsoft to ensure that A, it's secure, but also B, that it's going to function and not cause issues on the operating system. Once that part of the process is done, you can go through and actually get that driver or kernel mode application signed by Microsoft, which then validates it and enables it to run in the actual operating system. So those are some of the neat new features that help block attacks and also mitigate attacks if something was already infested on the machine.
That's awesome. Thanks, Eric. Another piece that we wanted to talk about, and another sign that you're ready to move on to Windows 10, is around hardware. And that whole landscape. It's pretty interesting. Alan, our CTO, is kind of the guru on our end for determining like what hardware we should use and why. So we wanted to spend some time with Alan learning a little bit more about that. So Alan.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. And so yeah, like Eric was talking about secure boot, Windows 7 doesn't support secure boot, and this all kind of started happening when the 7th generation processors came out, and now we're on 8th gen. So 7th gen was the the model before the ones that are shipping today. And with those, starting with 7th gen, Intel and Microsoft and all the hardware component manufacturers got together and said, we're not going to support Windows 7 anymore because it's too hard to make an OS that was developed so long ago. There's just fundamental changes in the newer OSs to support some of this new hardware. So this is going to be the cutoff. We're not going to support 7 on 7th generation hardware anymore. But because the chipsets stayed the same, you could buy basically a 7th gen machine with a 6th gen and still run Windows 7. But that was like really confusing for everyone. Nobody understood that kind of coming out of the gate, and so a lot of people just from the channel started they're out of the old machine, and they started getting the new machine, and it started showing up with 7th gen processors, and Windows 7 wouldn't work. So that was confusing. We had some customer scenarios where they shipped entire huge quantities of machines back and got the 6th gen processor just so they could run 7, or just so they could run Windows 7. But you're missing out on a lot of the functionality. You have to turn secure boot off, put it on legacy mode, which is a lot slower, not to mention the security aspect of it. And so now we're on to 8th gen machines, and those 7th and 8th only run Windows 10, and they're shipping secure boot from the factory. It's turned on, everything's all set for Windows 10. So it's the time is here. We also, we've had some experience. We've had experience with a lot of our customers. They buy all sorts of different hardware, but we've seen a lot of. We really recommend people stick with enterprise class hardware. It's easier to maintain and update. It's more reliable, secure. It's easier to service. Like Eric talked about with the vulnerabilities, a lot of the lower tier OEMs didn't handle those very well. It's really hard to go and update the Intel firmware on a machine versus like Dell, HP, Lenovo. Dell can update the Intel ME firmware straight through their BIOS update. So it's some of those things get a lot harder if you're using some of these lower end things. And for us, we've seen like there's this huge fall off, and we package our. Spencer will talk about this later, but we package our drivers in what we call platform packs. And in the download statistics of those, like the top 10 are downloaded like, 50 times more than the entire rest of the packs that we have. And you can just see that like those are the most popular ones. And if you're using one of those, then problems are getting found and addressed far more quickly. Whereas if you have, if you're like, well, I really like, I like this Toshiba, whatever. Well, perhaps you're maybe a little bit more on your own with some of those things because they're not, there's not everybody's using that model. So, and we've seen, you go down market and you get kind of the second and third tier component suppliers too. Instead of having like an Intel wireless radio, you end up with a Realtek or Broadcom or Qualcomm or whatever. And there was one example where we had a customer where they bought these Dell XPS machines and they have killer wireless, which is actually, it was Airthos, but Qualcomm bought Airthos, so now it's Qualcomm. But they had some connection and reliability issues with those radios, and they ended up ripping those radios out of like 1,000 Dell XPS machines and putting Intel radios in them. So it's just to say, be cautious on what you're buying, because it could cost you more down the road than the difference in the upfront cost. Another thing is a lot of these new machines are coming with not just SSDs now, but NVMe SSDs. And Windows 7, there is a compatibility hotfix for 7, but it's literally just, it just can barely make it work, basically. you're not getting the performance, and if you turn on BitLocker, it really has an impact. So, I've seen customers where they have these really expensive high-end workstation machines that have all the CPU and RAM and has all the, multiple NVMEs that are in RAID, and then they want to put Windows 7 on it, and it's like, well, that's great, but you're losing half of what you're paying for in the hardware. So, if you're on Windows 10, that stuff just works perfectly, and it's full speed, and everything. So, next slide. So, proactive versus reactive, and so this is just saying, like, for Windows 7, I think I already talked about it. We don't want you to be stuck. You already can't. I think you can still buy some 6th generation machines, but all these new machines, it's not supported on Windows 7. So we want you to be ready, and we want those machines to be able to work as good as they can for you. So yeah, that's about it.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you, Alan. Yeah, so, those are some of the reasons why you would want to start thinking about getting off of Windows 7. Obviously, it's an older operating system, and end of life is coming for it in 2020. Support is going away. So now is the time to start looking at the timeline as far as what your migration is going to look like. And there's a number of different options as far as, tools that you can use for migration, MDT or SCCM or SmartDeploy or Ghost, or there's a million different ways to do it. But now is the time to, if you don't have one of those tools in your environment, actually start the evaluation process so that you know what you're going to use and you're comfortable when the time comes. We've seen with some of our customers around 250 seat size, it's about a 3-month process to get from evaluation to actual migration process. As that number goes up, so does the timeline as well. So start thinking about your specific environment, what tools you have, what tools you're going to use as far as getting that upgrade ready. In addition to the actual migration deployment process, Microsoft makes a readiness tool that you can take a look at to see if your machines are actually ready for Windows 10. And that will do some cool things like, hey, check the disk space. If you're going to do an upgrade process and just let Windows 10 install over the top of Windows 7 and do the full upgrade, then it'll identify machines where you might have an issue. So it's a very cool tool to check out. In addition to just the timeline in general, there are some caveats around deployment and using enterprise operating system, enterprise versions of Windows 10 on machines, or, capturing and deploying OEM versions. So we have this conversation a lot. We actually did an entire webcast around just how Windows is licensed in general. And, some of those things are good to take a look at now. So if you're not volume licensed and you're actually doing deployments, you don't have reimaging rights for OEM-based media. But Microsoft has a way to help you out there. So if you purchase a volume license agreement, I think the minimum is like 5, and then it actually can be extended free of charge to the number of OEM devices that you actually have in your environment. So if you have 100 machines that you've bought from Dell or HP or Lenovo or somebody else that came with Windows 10 on them, you can get your Mac key or your volume license key extended for those 100 devices free of charge. So it's a very cool program to take a look at, and keeps you in compliance with Microsoft's specific licensing.
The thing to keep in mind is sometimes when you're at checkout and you're building out config for your machines, you get a choice of the SKU of Windows that you want. Some machines still have downgrade rights to 7. We recommend not doing that. We also recommend buying the machine with the SKU of Windows that you expect to be running. So if there's an option to run home and have it ship with home, don't buy that. Pay the couple extra bucks and order it with Windows 10 Pro. Those are where the real licensing challenges end up coming up, as you bought some lower version of Windows and now you want to run a higher version of Windows. And then the free basically upgrade to just use volume media and reimage it doesn't work out so well, and you end up having to rebuy Windows down the road, and that's where really the perception of volume licensing is hard and it's expensive and I don't want to do it and I don't know how, and that's when that comes into play. Obviously, when you unbox your machine, you're not seeing a Windows media disk in the box anymore, and so IT pros are looking around their desk drawer saying, how do I reinstall my operating system? And this isn't there. So Microsoft, in addition to the Volume License Service Center, they've given you the ability to create yourself Windows 10 install media. There you have a Microsoft media creation tool that will go and make an ISO or DVD or whatever you want for you. Generally, that stuff is on retail. People also noticed, hey, there's no COA sticker on my machine now. Like, how does this activate? Where's my key? Like, that's changed now, right? Those keys are getting stamped into the hardware and the device itself. And so the most compliant way to do it, buy your machines with the SKU that you want, get that volume license agreement so you can download the latest media right from Microsoft, and use that. You always want to start on the newest, highest version that you can so that you're not always out of date, and we'll talk more about updates. But volume licensing isn't as scary as you might think. It isn't as expensive as you might think, and like Eric said, you only need a 5-pack of your to start an open license agreement, and really only one of those needs to be Windows 10. Like, you could use those licenses to have other products there too. So check out smartdeploy.com if you want more information. We have a lot of these questions come up, and we can give you guys pointers to volume licensing. But it's not that scary, not that expensive, and mostly just do the right thing and get it. It'll make your life easier because you'll have media that you can download directly from them, and you have one key that's meaningful for all the activations in your environment. You're not going to get audited and sued by Microsoft and cost yourself your job. So keep that in mind. So we want to switch gears here and talk a little bit more about managing Windows 10. So we've given you some tips on hardware and security and some great benefits for moving. You should. It's the right thing to do. And you're going to get your hand forced anyway. So might as well start in on it if you haven't already. But things and how the operating system is being managed by Microsoft has changed, right? With previous versions of Windows, they called it what it was, and that was that. It was Windows 7, or it was XP, or it was 8, or it's 8.1. Now Microsoft is just calling it Windows 10, and the reality is we're on our 6th version of Windows 10. It's not readily apparent to users on what's happening and what's being updated, and these are major version product updates that are happening in place on your system. I don't know how many of you planned on doing an upgrade for, say, Vista to 7 in place, or 7 to 8 in place, or 8 to 8.1 in place, or if any of you did any of those things. If any of you have done that, they may not have always been perfectly successful. That's certainly been our experience. And we're seeing a similar trend here. So Microsoft starts out with version 15.07, but 6 generations later, we're now at 18.03. Each one of those iterations, that major version product change should mean that we're now at Windows 16. And historically, Microsoft has kind of done this tick-tock product release where they did something relatively minor and then something major, and relatively minor and something major. And now that those lines are kind of getting blurred, and these updates are getting doled out to you. So there's good and bad, and we'll talk more about that. Microsoft is trying to make it better for you. They're trying to make it easier. They're trying to make it more secure. They're trying to make it more painless. They're trying to make it faster. They're trying to take some of the management overhead out of your hands so you don't have to worry about it. And we'll talk more about the pros and cons there. But the perception, again, is better security, faster operating systems, better performance, new features, better usability, higher productivity, like all these benefits. And we largely agree, but it's really kind of into the delivery model, and some of the nitty-gritty may not work as well as you might want. The other piece is, by design, IT folks are generally control freaks, right? And that's part of your role, is to keep your environment secure and controlled and set up and dictated how you want it to be. And now some of that's getting taken out of your hands, and Microsoft's deciding how it's going to be for you. And some of our customers, that's great and that's acceptable. Other customers, it's super not, and we'll talk more about that. But sort of the management strategy isn't as clear, and now we have some question marks around end user productivity, right? If you have a end user who's going to be receiving one of these major version product updates, it appears to the end user is just a regular Windows update. So they're used to, 5 or 10 minutes of downtime, let their machine restart, and away you go. That's not what happens in these cases. It's a full in-place product update, and it can take 30 minutes or an hour or something like that, and it can be unexpected, and sometimes it can totally fail. So our customers are asking for other approaches to kind of get some control back. And this Windows as a Service delivery model has implications not only for how the product is still delivering. My first impression of it was basically it's a pricing and subscription and licensing change. So it is that, but it's also this whole other delivery mechanism. So keep that stuff in mind. Eric or Alan, you got anything else to add? I forgot.
No, I think that was good.
Okay. All right, I'm going to turn the time back over to Eric and Alan. We're going to talk a little bit more. There's a kind of slider bar here between, in the reality is you're probably somewhere in the middle between, hey, just go ahead and let Microsoft manage all this on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end, you get to manage it on your own, how you want. And like I say, reality is you guys are probably going to land somewhere in the middle. Maybe some departments or remote user, it's fine to just let Microsoft manage it, and maybe for another department you need total control. So I'll let these guys walk through it.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. So for sure, this is kind of two ends of the spectrum, right? When you talk about Windows updates, like Spencer had mentioned, the philosophy has changed around it. There are still the, monthly hotfixes and everything that don't take very long. Those can just be installed at shutdown and you're good to go. But then you also slip in some of these major, 2 times a year, the major upgrades, which are just like moving to a new operating system. So you have some options in how you're going to control how those are sent out to users. And like Spencer said, so in some scenarios it's perfectly acceptable to allow those things to just install via Windows Update, and the new version comes out. Once the version of Windows 10 that the user is running hits into life, it'll just upgrade to the newest version available. And that's fine in some scenarios, and it's super easy to let that happen. You don't have to really do anything at all. It just happens in the background. But you do want to be aware of that and at least keep track of, when those operating systems are going to be forced to upgrade, so that you can notify the users of those specific machines. Because it can be a long upgrade process. It's gotten better over time. I think it was an hour to 1703, and then like 45 minutes to 1709, and now down to 30, because they're doing a great job of pre-staging some of those bits in the actual operating system, so you're still running, and the USMT process is happening and linking all your files, and then you can reboot, and it takes less time to actually finish the upgrade. But it's still impactful to the user's day. We have run into it here, so customers ask us about what's the best way to manage this, and we've taken a couple different approaches just to see what it's like in the actual wild. And we've had users that shut down to go to a meeting and say, oh, I have to upgrade I have to install updates, okay. And then 45 minutes later, they're 3/4 of the way through their meeting, and their machine's just finally rebooting and getting back up to where they actually needed it to be to share slides or something like that. So it's very important to understand what users are going to be upgraded when. Some of it is a little random, just on when that upgrade hits Windows Update and the operating system version that they're on. So if you're not doing anything else, at least keep track of who has which version of Windows 10. Some cons to this are obviously you lose that control. You don't have the ability to say, oh, there's this great new feature in the 1803 release, or what'll be the 1809 release later, that you want all users to have at a specific point in time. It might lead to more support requests or more unhappy users just because they don't understand why they're going through this process. So over communicate as much as you can if you're going to take this strategy. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's complete control. And this can be accomplished in a number of different ways. So, SUS has options for actually pre-staging these upgrades in your environment, and then you can approve them and target specific machines so that you can do, hey, a group of 5 users as a pilot, see what kind of support requests you get back from that, and then, kind of broaden the scope of pushing out that upgrade. You also have the option of redeploying it like it is a new operating system. It essentially is. So you could take that tact and maintain users' data through a migration and then start them clean each time, which has its benefits as well. Just cleaning up Windows operating system in general. If you're going to take this route, plan as much as you can. So know when those releases are coming out. It's 2 times a year right now. And identify the ones that you actually want to go to. You don't have to hit every Windows version. You can skip some if the improvements aren't relevant to your organization. Always keep your master image updated as well, just in case something goes wrong. And I think this is the same for, the other strategy as well. That disaster recovery if something in the upgrade process actually does fail. You'll want to have some way to remediate the problem as quickly as possible. Some cons of this scenario are that it takes a little bit more time and engineering on the IT staff. So you're actually having to go through the entire process, set up SUS, make sure that your users' operating systems are set so that they're not going to auto upgrade just via whatever is on Windows Update at the time. So really have to plan out this scenario to get it to work. And like Spencer mentioned, somewhere in the middle is probably more right for most individuals. It is totally fine for users to upgrade on their own because the process is continuing to get better. But for those really important systems, your CEO or something that's utilized by a team for scanners or anything where it's mission critical, you also have the option of using the long-term servicing branch. It's really recommended for mission critical devices and not your everyday user. But it is basically Windows 10 where it will survive longer than the normal operating system as far as release schedule. It's not going to upgrade every 6 months to a year. It's going to go much longer than that before support is off, I guess, basically.
Cool. So that's part of the planning is to, do an audit of your environment, figure out which systems are a good candidate to just choose the Microsoft, set it and forget it, don't worry about it. And for those machines, just make sure you have a backup plan if something does blow up, and you might be just fine. And the other systems, and maybe it's per departments, or you've got labs. We work a lot with education, and they fall into this category of needing to be in control and can't let Windows Update do a minor version or version product update in the middle of the day while the teachers are trying to run the lab. So get yourself on a schedule and proactively reimage those machines. A lot of customers don't really think about using reimaging as a tool to stay on top of these updates cycles because many reimaging tools can be challenging to use. And so because it's not close and convenient and quick, then it doesn't really come up as an idea to try and mitigate or manage around this. And so we can give you tips on how you could use MDT or use SmartDeploy or some other imaging tool in an efficient way so that you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. It's not that bad to set up, and you get to stay in control of what happens in your environment when. So again, somewhere in the middle is probably where you're going to land, but just know you've got some choices, and even the hard stuff isn't that hard. So yeah. Advance the slide here. It looks. We want to talk a few more tips about managing these updates.
Yeah, for sure. So in-place upgrade, regardless of when you're using it, there are some things to know. So it is essentially, like we've mentioned, a migration to a new operating system. That's basically what it boils down to. And it leaves behind some things that you'll probably want to clean up. So if you're going to run in-place upgrades, just be sure that you're scheduling this cleanup to run. That way you can get rid of that Windows.old folder and save your users 20 to 30 gigs of space on their hard drive. Hard drive space is getting larger and larger and larger, but it's still nice to not have that old operating system installation sitting around if you're never going to use it again.
And that's part of what people may not realize. Like the whole old operating system is still sitting there. All those files are still there. Hard drives are, like Alan mentioned, moving from magnetic disks to SSDs to these cool NVMe drives that are getting really fast, and they're awesome for those of you that all have them. Once you have one, you can't go back to the slow spinning disk. So the stuff's getting faster, but the storage size is getting smaller. So now people aren't running around with 1+ terabyte NVMe drives because it costs a fortune. They're back to a 256 is pretty common. And obviously files are getting bigger. So some users that pack around a lot of local storage and have videos and virtual machines or whatever they run on the machines, you can run into storage limitations, and just cleaning up the OS from the upgrade has become problematic and may fail. If you look at the hard drive icon in Windows Explorer and it's red, and you want these in-place upgrades to happen, it may not work out so awesome for you. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, thanks, Spencer. So as far as Windows 10 goes as well, and this is just kind of in general, if you're an image builder and you're using SysPrep as is recommended, and the only supported way to deploy images with Microsoft, they have to be SysPrepped. There are a couple things to keep in mind here. So more and more of the operating system is becoming these AppX packages, or the Windows Store apps, as they may, universal Windows apps, whatever you want to call them today. But essentially, those things auto-update as soon as the operating system hits the internet. And even when 1803 came out, the second that we got it and hit the internet, some of those AppX packages were updating, and that will actually break SysPrep. So you'll get a message that says their user provisioned AppX packages and SysPrep cannot complete, and that's kind of a immediate stop sign for you. You can't really do anything after that except for go in and uninstall them through some dism commands or through some PowerShell commands, and then you end up with your operating system in a weird state. So just as a thing to recognize when you're creating your image, if you can, boot that thing right into audit mode the first time and leave it disconnected from the internet. Then there's actually registry settings that you can set on that specific operating system as you're building it out, so that the Windows Store apps don't update in the background, and that'll keep you from running into SysPrep failures in the future. And I think we'll share that in our virtual trade show or booth, so that you guys can go see that. We have a video that explains the whole process and shows you the specific registry keys that you can go ahead and set. In addition to just running SysPrep, there are a couple things to know that are going to happen once SysPrep is run on a machine. So SysPrep is, I guess I should take a step back and explain, SysPrep is used to generalize the operating system so that it's in a clean state when it goes out to a new machine, and that way you don't end up with duplicate SIDs or identification information or unused information from the previous installation of the operating system. It just cleans it all up so it's like a brand new install on the new device that it's been deployed to. But that can cause some problems with any built-in accounts. So if you're configuring from a built-in administrator account or creating your own administrator account, some things to know are your start menu is not going to look the same from the point where you captured to the point where it's deployed. And this is just a byproduct of how SysPrep works. It's actually uninstalling and cleaning out all of those AppX packages so that they can be re-provisioned on the new machine. But that doesn't really take place for existing accounts. So just something to be aware of if you want to use local accounts for any reason, a demo machine or something like that, or if you expect your built-in local administrator account to still be in that pristine state once it's deployed. It's not going to look like that. And, we do a ton of stuff to mitigate this and actually make sure that they do work, but Spencer can talk more about that later. Upgrades. So again, if you're building images, start fresh. Start like it's a new version of Windows. Don't do an in-place upgrade on your reference machines, just because it does leave around a lot of artifacts from the old operating system. In fact, one of them actually stops the reprovisioning of those AppX packages, and you end up with broken stuff in newly created user accounts. So Calculator might not function correctly because there's a registry key that says don't re-register these AppX packages during SysPrep. This was an upgrade. So if you can, we recommend that you always start fresh with a fresh install of the newly released version of Windows 10 and just treat it like it's a new operating system. If for some reason you can't, again, you'll at least want to, at minimum, delete that registry key so that things re-provision on deployment. And again, we can share that as well.
Eric, I know a lot lately people have wanting to have like default copy profile like they used to do on Windows 7 and customize those start menus so all their users look a certain way, internet shortcuts, desktop wallpaper, all of that. maybe you can touch a little bit on that, how that's changed for current Windows 10 as it relates to AppX packages, and it doesn't work that same way anymore, and people still want those customizations or struggling how to do it. You got any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this really relates back to extremely old versions of Windows, XP 2000, where you could actually just copy a user into the default user, and then that was your copy profile, essentially. That functionality was moved into sysprep to keep from breaking things by just doing a copy process. And, it lived in that way for a while, and it still exists. You can still configure your device and run copy profile at sysprep time and have it copy over some of the settings, but it doesn't copy over everything, and it's really not well documented what it does and doesn't. It's just kind of a trial and error type of thing. But I guess the key to take away from that is it's existed for a long time, but they found better ways to do it. So you can go in and export your start menu layout, for example, or you can use group policy to configure a lot of these things, whether it's a default wallpaper or pinned taskbar items or just the look and feel of the operating system. A lot of that management stuff is better done outside of the build process of your image and done with group policy so that it's effective and run while the operating system is in place rather than before it's in place on the device.
Cool. Thanks. Awesome. So to kind of summarize some of what we've been talking about, you need to find a solution that's going to do what you need to do, and all these tools that are out there. I mean, obviously, we're heavily invested in the imaging space, and can give you great ways of managing Windows 10 net new, whether you're buying brand new hardware or you have existing machines and you want to reimage them to whatever version of Windows 10 you want. Obviously, SmartDeploy, is great at that, and we can take more of a look at that. But there's a bunch of other tools out there as well. I mean, MDT from Microsoft is fantastic. It has no licensing cost, which is wonderful, but it's really as great as you make it. You're the engineer, the architect, the developer, tester. It's like a Lego set, right? It's only going to look as cool as you decide to make it. And if you've got the time and the training and the ability to do the homework and craft that up, it can work like a champ, especially tied back in with System Center. If you're getting System Center as part of your agreement with Microsoft, so it's sort of free to you. They work better together, and you can make that go the whole way. If you have hardware that's all totally identical and you want to just make a clone of one hard disk basically and use software to push that out to a bunch of exact same devices, then the Symantec Ghost and the Chronic Snap deploys work awesome in those environments because they're sector-based imaging cloning tools. That's what they're designed to do. But if you're in a hardware diverse environment and you don't have a bunch of time to dedicate to these projects, then SmartDeploy might be a great option for you. It's kind of Windows deployment in the box, and everything is all ready to go to do it for you. You can do this all scheduled whenever you want. You can do it on demand. You can do it zero touch. You can do it light touch. There's a number of ways of doing the actual deployment. It could be just a simple USB stick with everything on it, or a DVD set, to pushing images out across your existing network. You can even pull images down from your favorite cloud storage provider like Google Drive or OneDrive or OneDrive for Business or Dropbox. Like SmartDeploy ties in with those third-party cloud storage providers to be able to do deployment from anywhere, which is great for branch office, remote office, home user, where you don't have on-site IT to be able to do these imaging upgrade projects and quickly and efficiently. So it's a great way to be able to easily maintain the versions of Windows that you need. You might have good reason to stay on Windows 7 until the last possible moment for some users, but for some users or departments you're ready to move, it's nice that it gives you the ability to do this on your timeline and your schedule. So the way SmartDeploy works is you get to make your golden image based off of the software that you like. Sticking back true to our roots, we love virtualization, we love virtual machines, we use it every place we think that it makes sense, and this is a place we think it makes a ton of sense. Grab your volume license media Windows 10 freshie and create a new virtual machine, slap that operating system on it, go ahead and run Windows updates, make sure it's all patched and happy and looking how you want, and then just shut it down. SmartDeploy will take care of the rest. So it's cool. You get to create, maintain that virtual machine over time and run Windows updates and recapture it over and over and over. And Since we'll run sysprep at deployment time, you can maintain the integrity of that reference VM. But the key is you get to make images. We use Microsoft's same image file format, Windows Imaging File Format, or WIM file. If any of you use MDT or Config Manager or WDS and all that stuff. So same file format. SmartDeploy goes and makes a WIM out of your virtual machine, basically, and we sanitize that as well. So we peel out and make sure it's really clean. So the image itself is all hardware independent. Separately, and one of the main reasons why customers like SmartDeploy is you can download a pre-built device driver pack called the Platform Pack that has full device driver support for any machine you want to deploy to. So go ahead and make your image based off of the software you like, and then we'll take care of making sure that it's going to work like a champ on that Dell or Lenovo or HP or Microsoft Surface device, which is really nice. You don't have to go back to your reseller and make sure they always have good stock on that particular SKU and version. You can just buy what you feel like buying, and gives you guys more flexibility for cost and features, and let end users maybe have an opinion on the device that they get to pick, and know that you and IT get to make sure it's going to work great. And at deployment time, we basically put those two pieces back together again. There's no training required. You can set this up in your existing environments. Most customers can get through a proof of concept in an afternoon, couple hours, going from nothing to seeing a deployment without training and everything else. So that's kind of how that plays out. I did want to do a quick little product tour so you guys have some idea about what SmartDeploy looks like. Go ahead and head to smartdeploy.com/demo, and you can sign up to we've got a number of different demo options. We've got live demos, recorded ones, on demand, meet with our reps. So we'd love to show you that. Let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen here, if this is going to work out for us. Just a moment. Cool. So when you install SmartDeploy, we call this the SmartDeploy console. And this is the tool that you would use to build everything out. So on first launch, we'll always bring you to this activity section. And if you really just march along these in contiguous order, you're going to build everything out. We'd give you links to videos, let you know your active time, inactive time, and tips along the way. But the basic idea is build a VM with the OS and apps that you like, shut it down, and then move on and capture it. A simple capture wizard. Most everything's wizard driven. It looks basically like this. You'll see that we try not to ask you too many questions on any one page, but the big idea here is you browse to a virtual machine that you like. It'll go ahead and pick up the different disks and partitions. You could bake your product key and creds into the thing, next, finish, and away you go. 5 minutes later, you have a new WIM created from SmartDeploy. The third thing is the platform packs. So here's the coolest part. You could just come in and say, hey, we like the Surface device, Surface Pro 4. Well, Pro 4, for example. There you go. You can see you've got a couple of packs, a pack already built for that. You select it, you hit download, and that's it. It's just going to go ahead and download the driver pack for that. And you continue that until you download driver packs for everything that you like. You can see I've got a library here of a bunch of different packs. We're updating these all the time. You can see that this is the one that is being downloaded, and these ones have updates, so you could right click and hit update. Another really cool feature of SmartDeploy is you're able to push out just driver updates now with the new version that we released, where if there's updated drivers that we have, you could right click, push deploy those drivers out to the machine. You'll get the latest drivers on it without actually needing to reimage it. But you can drill into these packs and see that we organize these by make, model, and OS, and really you can run custom scripts or tasks that you want, but basically the idea is that these are all the drivers from the OEM that make the device you're using work like a champ without any headaches for you. Again, we can tie in with cloud storage providers, so you could upload your images and platform packs to Google Drive, for instance, and do deployment that way. Create a quick answer file. Customers love answer files because they help with automation, but they struggle with it because they're usually pretty manual and you got to write your own stuff. Make your boot media and away you go. So one last quickie thing to point out. So I've got this computer management section where, let's say you want to push some images out to some machines. Well, great. You can just come and select a collection of them, and it's really right click and hit deploy now, or schedule that at some point in the future. We'll go ahead and deploy now. pick what I want to deploy. We've got Wake on LAN built right in. We've got multicast built right in. It's all ready to go. Confirm that, and that would basically push the image out to those devices. So that's just a quick demo of a basic, couple of things on the product itself. But again, head to smartdeploy.com/demo, and you can see that and sign up for additional demos there. So move back to our slides here. Cool. So I'll be in the chat later to answer any additional questions you have. We're going to jump into a Q&A, but make sure that you head to smartdeploy.com/ITProToday to get those 15 free licenses. There includes basic support as well. Get through a proof of concept and enjoy those licenses, and we're happy to help you with any additional that you might need. But yeah, we'll take a minute and jump through a little bit of Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, it looks like we have a few minutes, and we have quite a few questions here. So first question is going to be a three-parter. First part, do you have to be on a domain to push images out to physical devices? What if you use vSphere? Can you use this instead of VMware View or vCenter to clone?
Yeah, so I'll take the first part of that on the domain process. So no, you don't have to be on a domain actually to push any of these images out. The process that Spencer went through with computer management, he was deploying to machines that are on the local area network that he's on, so they show up in the console. However, if you happen to have a client that was installed on a machine that's, on their home internet connection, it'll still show up in your console if you're cloud enabled, which we can set up the cloud enabled for anyone if they want to check it out. But essentially that routes through Azure, and the console and the client can talk to each other regardless of the network that they're on or the state that they're in. As long as you have our console with the client installed on it, the two can talk and you can deploy images anywhere. Regarding vSphere and VMware, so SmartDeploy can be used to capture and deploy images to and from those products. I don't know if you want to expand any on that.
No, we definitely, we support Player and Workstation and ESX. ESX is a little bit more complex for us just because it's a Linux file system. So if you want to capture that VM, you either need to boot it to SmartDeploy to capture it, or you need to download the VMDK from the data store to the machine that's running SmartDeploy. So it can be a little bit added layer of complexity. Some people really like to do it that way, really like to use ESX because I got a huge, powerful server farm and I want to do that, and that's fine. It can add a little bit of a layer to it. As far as Horizon or View or whatever, we don't really integrate with those, but we're more focused on provisioning or deploying a perfect golden image to an actual not really we support deploying to virtualization, but it's really about deploying to hardware, right? So we don't really integrate with the cloning and stuff of VMwares.
Okay, great. Next question, do you have to buy a Microsoft image to create the base image, even if you're using all HP and they have OEM DVDs with Windows 10 operating system?
Yeah, the best way to do it, and we talked quite a bit about the volume licensing stuff, the best way to do it is get yourself a volume license key, basically a Mac key. If you bought all those machines with Windows 10 Pro on them, you can reimage them with Windows 10 Pro without having to rebuy it. You just need to buy a 5-pack of Windows. Only one of those needs to be a Windows 10 license. The rest can be an open license for something else. Then you can just download the ISO right from Microsoft and know that you can use deploy to those HPs now, or some days if you have a Dell or a Surface or whatever, it won't matter. OEM licensing has quite a few restrictions, right? The OEM wants you to set it back to the way it was. Customers want a custom, and you're restricted to just reimaging with that OEM. So it's the right way to go is get that Mac key and do it that way.
Yeah, I think we have an entire webcast just around OEM
that.
licensing.
Yeah.
With Chris from Microsoft that goes through the whole thing, but I think what's confusing is people are like, I already paid for Windows, I don't want to pay for Windows again, and you certainly don't have to do that. It's just OEM doesn't give you reimaging rights, and what reimaging rights means is reimaging is you want to create a single custom image that you then want to deploy to multiple machines. That's reimaging. If you want to take the DVD that came from HP and put it in each machine and let it load, you can do that, but you can't take that DVD, put it into a VM, install Office, customize it, capture that image, and then deploy it to all those IHPs. That's reimaging, and OEM licensing doesn't give that to you, and Microsoft just wants to have you have a volume license, which is a small cost, and then you have a Mac, you get a key that you can use on all those, that grants you activations on that key for whatever number of machines you have. And then, I guess what they get out of it is they get the tracking. They get like, okay, this Mac key belongs to this company, and it was, loaded onto all these machines, or whatever. This image was loaded on all these machines. So.
Cool.
Okay, great. Could you also re-mention the URL that you mentioned a couple of slides ago?
Yeah, so
for the download?
Oh, yeah, smartdeploy.com/download gets you the product. But for all you participants, what you really want to do is you get 15 free licenses that never expire, plus 1 year of basic support to get you started. So visit smartdeploy.com/ITProToday. Again, smartdeploy.com/ITProToday to activate your offer and claim your 15 free licenses. There's no catches. Perfect for managing a small department or a collection of remote users. And there's also a ton of great Windows 10 tips and videos in our booth on YouTube as well, so check those out.
Okay, great. A couple more questions here. So, what about the end of life for Windows 10 operating system and the need to roll out to the next version? Do you support all versions of Windows 10?
Yeah, for sure. So we touched on some of this when we were talking about updates and how you control what's going to happen. So yeah, unless you're using the long-term servicing branch, the specific versions like Spencer mentioned, 1507, 1511, 1607, 1609, 1703, 1709, 1803. There's a lot of them there. Each one of those essentially has an expiration date, and when that expiration date is hit, it's going to start forcing the user to upgrade. So that's why I mentioned it's very important to know which release ID your users are on and when that release ID is going to basically end of life, like the question mentioned. So we support every version of Windows 10 that's come out, and we continue to test and dev against new versions as they're in the insider previews to make sure that when that thing hits RTM that there's full support from SmartDeploy should anything change within the operating system that would impact how we do deployment.
That's the nice thing about SmartDeploy too. We're always working on it, and we find something, we quickly fix it, get it supported, and re-release. So
yeah, we've continued to try to support Windows 10 as Windows 10, meaning every version from LTSB to the very newest one. It's getting harder, I'll say that. There was major driver changes in 1803. Entire new. The camera moved from being an imaging device to being a camera. Like they created an entire new asset class of devices or whatever, and those drivers don't work on the older versions of the OSs. So, it goes both ways. Like we try to support both, and it's getting harder for people to understand those stuff. And that's the one thing about. I saw a question about LTSB earlier on, and a lot of our customers have, liked that because it doesn't have the AppX stuff and it's supported longer term. The problem is it's, at least today, it's built on the original version of Windows 10, and there's entire classes of hardware. Again, it's kind of like it's almost like Windows 7. It's kind of crazy, but there's entire classes of hardware that aren't supported in that one because they've added so much support over these 6 builds or whatever of Windows 10, and so. It's hard to make LTSB work on some of these new machines, and the OEMs aren't testing it. They're not providing drivers that necessarily make it work. They're only shipping the very latest Windows 10, so that's the one they're testing. So it can be a little challenging, I think, to use LTSB, in a mass deployment, which Microsoft again doesn't really recommend. They recommend it for like kiosk machines and things that have to like survive forever. So. It's there's I'll stop there.
All right, great. Well, it looks like we've just out of time for this session, but I'd like to thank Spencer, Alan, Eric for your great presentation, and again to SmartDeploy for sponsoring the session.